Hey everyone, Joey here. In this video, I'm going to take some of this poplar that I got hanging around. I'm going to turn it into a display cabinet for some of my HO scale trains. Now I haven't decided if I'm going to be staining it, painting it, or just putting some poly on top of it and calling it a day. Haven't quite decided on that yet. But the first thing I need to do is start breaking this down into the pieces that I need so I can start putting it together. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I needed to do was to cut all my stock to length. And right here I'm just chopping everything up on the miter saw. For the shelves, I left them a little long because I did need to plane them down to a 1/2 of an inch instead of leaving it at 3/4. This is 1 by stock, so it's 3/4 of an inch thick. So I planed those down to get a thinner profile on the shelves because I didn't want them to look too thick. I just figured aesthetically this will look a lot better, and I'm really not giving anything up in the way of structural integrity, so it's just going to be a couple rail cars sitting on them, so it's not a big deal. And then I cut all the other sides and decorative pieces to length on the miter saw. So here I've got some shelves. I'm going to also rip those down to their final width as well, and I've got the other pieces done. So here I'm ripping the various pieces to their proper widths, starting with the shelves. They don't need to be too wide because I will have a little bit of a space behind them to account for the backing that's going to go into it and also the cleat that's going to hang on the wall. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't making the width of the entire thing. I wanted to leave some room in the back. So here I'm creating rabbets on the sides of the shelving units, or the shelves. And then I'm leaving just enough room so that eventually I'll cut dados in the sides of the sides of the sides of the cabinet to fit these. So here I'm making grooves in the shelves so that I can place my rail cars right inside of them. I measured out track. It's about 11/16 of an inch wide between the flanges. And so I just cut grooves to match that width, and now I can just slide my rail cars on and off of there. Here I'm cutting dados inside the back of the bottom shelf and also the sides of the cabinet so that I can fit my backing inside there, which is a 1/8 inch piece of masonite. You can see here I'm test fitting it. Wasn't quite wide enough, so I had to just slice that up a little bit more. And then I just kept adjusting it, fine-tuning it until I found something that was loose enough for it to fit in there, but tight enough that it didn't slide out too easily. There wasn't going to be a lot of play in that. So here I'm just test fitting, dry fitting, to make sure everything works. It looks good. Next thing it was to cut up the backing, which again, just a piece of masonite, and just cut that up to length on the table saw. Here I'm just using the cross-cut sled to get the final dimension, and then I dry fit everything into place. I had to use clamps so it didn't fall apart. It wasn't that tight. Here I'm just putting masking tape on the sides of the cabinet so that when I route out the dados, I'm not getting a lot of chip out on the front and the sides. And here again I just dry fit everything just to make sure it looks good. I thought it looked great. And so all I had to do now was a couple more chamfers on the top and bottom. These are going to be decorative pieces. They're not going to be structural in any way. They're really just there to hide some pocket holes that I eventually screwed into or created inside the top and bottom to right here. Just cutting some pocket holes so I can attach the bottom and the top of the cabinet to the sides. I did this instead of doing like a miter joint with splines. I haven't really gotten into that too much yet, so I just wanted to do something simple. So I figured putting decorative pieces on top and bottom was a nice way to kind of skirt that issue. Here I'm just cutting up the rails and stiles for the door and making sure that's all measured out correctly. Cutting some dados on the door stiles and rails, which I basically made my own tongue and groove joinery on these. I didn't want to do anything too large, like 1/4 inch plexiglass or anything for the quote-unquote glass of the door. I wanted to keep it light, so I got some really lightweight Lexan, which is just a really thin acrylic, Since it's 3/32 of an inch, so here I'm just cutting out the tongues to fit in those grooves. So I just measured everything out, made sure everything was good, and just ran it through on the table saw. And everything fits. I did have to sand a couple pieces down just a little bit to get it to fit better, but all in all, not too bad. The top and the bottom are actually not perfectly square. The top is actually, I think, a 32nd of an inch shorter, but it was close enough. I didn't want to have to do that whole thing over again. And here I'm just sizing up the where I'm going to cut the acrylic. Now, trick with the acrylic, if you're going to cut it on the table saw like I did, make sure you put masking tape on the cut lines. Otherwise, you're going to get some splinters. It may crack and fly all over the place. Lexan's not too bad, but anything that's not as dense would probably chip and fly all over the place. I've gotten hit in the face before in the past, so yeah, that's definitely a lifesaver there. And here I'm just painting the back, and I also started painting some of the side panels and the shelves, just because before I start putting this thing together, I'm not going to be able to get in there and use a paint roller once it's all put together, because if I try painting the sides and the shelves, I'll get paint on the back. So basically I pre-painted all the pieces that I wasn't going to have easy access to. And here I'm just using some screws to join the top and the bottom, using the pocket hole method. And I chose Titebond 3 for my wood glue for attaching the shelves, mostly because it gives you a longer setup. It has a longer setup time. So if I need to wiggle the shelves around just to get them in the right position, to get them flush with the sides, I have enough working time to do that. The other glues I have, I wouldn't have had as much time to do that. And I did need to finesse a couple of the shelves to make sure that they fit okay. So that saved me there. And here I'm just making sure they're flush. And then just clamped them all up. And then I let that sit overnight. And see here, everything looks good. Next was assembling the door. And I'm just gluing that together, putting the Lexan in the middle, and just making sure everything is square. Again, it wasn't perfectly square because the top rail was just a hair shorter, but that's okay. I'm also sanding down the edges where I didn't quite get the groove in the right spot as well. There was a little bit of a warp to one of the rails, so I did have to adjust that. And here I'm just about to chisel out some of the places where I'm going to put the hardware. And I'm using an X-Acto knife to make my marks instead of a pencil. One of two reasons. One, it's more exact, no pun intended. And then the other reason is once I start chiseling out the wood, I'll have a nice little groove to place my chisel into, so I don't have to guess to make sure if I'm on the pencil line or not. I can just put it down into that little groove and then start chiseling away. This by far, I think, was probably the most fun I had on this project. I'm a huge proponent of power tools. I love power tools, but there was just something about, let's see here, actually using my Dremel tool to route out the bulk of the where the hinge is going to go. But it was something about actually carving wood by hand that just was really nice. It was very relaxing. I think I'm going to definitely get more into that as well. Here I'm just punching some, basically some little pilot holes to make sure that my drill bit goes into the center properly. And here I'm just marking out on my drill bits how deep I want to go so I don't drill too far into the wood. This is a quick way to do that. So here you'll see I won't go any farther than where the tape meets the edge of the wood, and so I've gone as far as I need to go to drive those screws in. And I also picked up a little magnet to put on the inside of the door. Instead of having a door handle, I wanted everything to be flush and kind of clean looking. And I'm a big fan of magnets, so I put those into almost all my projects now. And here I'm just drilling out the holes to attach that. And then the next thing I did was I measured from the bottom of the cabinet to the first hole on the cabinet, and then took that same measurement and placed it on the door, so I knew exactly how far up the door I needed to place the piece of metal. So that was a nice quick way to figure that out. And again, drilling some more holes and then attaching that later on. So here I'm gluing together the top and the bottom kind of decorative pieces. The bottom piece does have more of a function than the top in that I can actually set it on a table if I don't want to hang it on a wall. So it's wide enough and long enough that it's not going to tip over. It will have some stability when it's sitting there. But the top is really just to hide those screw holes. And I think it looks nice. And then I painted the rest of everything up in various stages. And then it was time to start putting all the hardware in, which is pretty straightforward. Here I'm just screwing it by hand so I don't strip anything out. And I did the hardware on the doors first because it was definitely easier than trying to attach a door to hardware that's on the side of the cabinet because of the height. So this made it a lot easier. And everything closes up nicely. The last thing to do was to create the cleat that I'll be using to attach to the cabinet to the wall. And so I just set my table saw at a 45 and then glued half of that in, and then the other half I'll shave down a little bit, and then I'll place that somewhere on some wall so I can hang it up. And with that, the cabinet was complete. Alright, everything is assembled and painted. I think it turned out quite well. This is the first time I've built a display cabinet for model trains before, so I wasn't sure with the design if I was going to like it or not in the end. This is kind of a prototype for how I build these in the future, but there are a couple design aspects of it that I really like. The first one being how it's mounted to the wall. So using this cleat system, all I have to do is make sure that I find a nice wall stud and mount this to the wall, the matching cleat, and then when I lower this down onto the cleat, it's not going anywhere. Now the cleat I'll install will be a little bit thicker so I can get a couple screws in there, and it'll be almost the full width of the back of the cabinet. Another thing that I'll keep going forward, at least for my model railroading cabinets, is these grooves in the shelves. Now they're track width grooves, so essentially these shelves become wooden re-railers. All I have to do is pop it in there, and there we go. At least I know it's not going to roll towards the front of the cabinet when I open the door, so that'll be good. And then of course it closes magnetically. Big fan of magnets, real easy. Looks nice and clean. I don't have any hardware hanging off the front of it. And I think the color's pretty nice too. I might keep this color for some future projects, but more than likely I'll try to change up the construction so that I can sand it down, stain it, finish it, or just keep it the natural color of whatever wood I choose. So if you are interested in seeing more of that stuff, consider subscribing so you can see those future videos and more construction videos like this. And until next time, thanks for watching, take care, we'll see you later.